Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening, depending on whenever you're watching this, if you're not watching it live. So, hi, I'm Kim, and I run Down It Workshops. I'm based in Huddersfield, but I travel all over the country doing all sorts of different workshops, and I'm just starting doing that again, and I'll soon be in the Midlands and in Devon, and next year I'll be back in Newcastle and all sorts of places in between. So, go all over, and I do all sorts of different workshops, and this is my second workshop with the Royal Voluntary Service and the Virtual Village Hall. And today we're going to be doing some lovely concrete plant pots. So it'll be things like these kind of things, which I'll show you a little bit closer soon. And when I turn my camera around, the light won't be quite so glary, so you'll be able to get a better idea of them. But the main things that you need for this are some concrete. And when I say concrete, I would recommend concrete over cement. So cement is kind of half of concrete. So if you go to like B&Q or something and you get cement, then it's going to be quite crumbly and you have to mix it with other things to turn it into concrete. Whereas if you buy concrete, pre-mixed, all done for you, and I would recommend this one. It's by Viva Decor. They're a German company, and it's so I always just Google Viva Decor concrete, and it tends to come up pretty quickly. And it's great stuff because it is designed for things like this. So it's much finer. It's got a really nice colour as well. So it comes out quite a pale grey so that you can paint on top of it and decorate it any way you like. But if you go into B&Q, you can use all sorts. I would recommend things used for kind of like postcrete. So putting in posts, fixing steps, anything like that is going to be a little bit finer than your general bog standard concrete in a bag. So I would generally recommend things that come in a tub like this, and they will be a little bit more expensive, but it comes out a lot better in the end. But of course, if you're wanting to do a really giant concrete plant pot, and I can give you some tips on that as well, then you can get the stuff in a bag as well. And I tend to experiment with lots of different ones, so you find every single different type of concrete will have a slightly different color to it. So sometimes I'll like layer up different ones, and they'll all act slightly differently as well. But like I said, this one is my favourite. It's lovely to use. It is much more expensive, but because it's designed for this kind of thing, it's perfect. So you need your concrete, you need some water, and you need something to mix it in. So just plain tap water, and I would use something like a yogurt pot, something that you don't mind getting completely destroyed. And then the other thing you're going to need is, I would recommend, we've all got masks now, so I would always wear a mask when you're doing this. I'm not going to wear one today just because I'm live and you won't be able to hear me properly, but I've got a window open right next to me for ventilation, and it's just because concrete can be quite abrasive on your lungs, so I definitely recommend wearing a mask, and if you can, do it outdoors as well. But the one that I'm using is a relatively low dust one, so that's not as bad for me. I'd also always use gloves because it's very drying on your hands. And if you've got some, wear goggles as well, because it's unlikely, but sometimes if you mix it wrong the first time and it's quite watery, if it gets in your eyes, it's not pleasant. So just a little bit of health and safety advice there. I'd always recommend taking all of those precautions. I know we've been wearing masks for ages and you might be fed up, but it's very worth doing. So you'll need those things, and then you'll need some extra recycled containers so that you can create molds. Because what we're going to do for things like this one here, this one's made out of an old pop bottle, so you can see the little ridges at the bottom. So that's a pop bottle on the outside and then a smaller container on the inside. So you want something that will fit in like that, but I'll show you more of that in one moment. And you can use molds like this as well, so I'll show you how to use both. What I'll do now is I'll turn around my camera so you can see what I'm doing, and please do feel free to ask questions. I'll be keeping an eye on everything and I will respond as quickly as I can. I know sometimes they don't pop up as I'm doing things, so I will get to it as quickly as possible. So let's just turn around my camera. It might just take a moment to do this. So I'll rearrange it to there while it goes. It did do this really quickly earlier, so hopefully. There we go. Sorry, it was showing up on my phone that it hadn't quite gone through yet. So you can see all of these different examples that I've got here. So I'm just going to have a quick look at my laptop just in case there's any questions that have come up. Please do feel free to say hello as well. I always like to know where people are watching from and if you've watched things with us before. So just one moment so I can load that up on my laptop over here. So you can do these all different sizes and shapes. So if you get something like a hummus pot, you can get this really nice wide thing where you could put like quite a kind of low succulent in it. That would look really lovely. And for that, you'd have a wider pot in the middle. For things like that, that's like a tiny little shaped yogurt pot, and that works really, really nicely too. Oh, I can see a couple of comments. Oh, Lindsay has said that she's missed the name of the concrete, and could I repeat it? So it is Viva Decor concrete. It's German, and on it it will say Beton für Creative. I don't know if it says it in English. No, it just says, so in fact, I'll get it in front of the camera again. So it's that you're looking for, but generally if you type in Viva Decor Concrete, it will come up. And I found, what was the website I got it from recently? Because for a while I was getting it from Amazon, and I will generally avoid Amazon as much as I possibly can and go for more independent websites. So I believe it was I think it might have been crafting.com, who I hadn't used before, but it was cheaper on there than it was on Amazon. So it's always worth having a look. With it being a German company, it does mean that the prices change quite a lot. And for it, with concrete, it's quite hard to colour it. So this one, I've coloured it by using, if anyone's watching has used Brusho before, it's lovely stuff. And it's just a kind of pigmented dye. So for this one, when I mixed up the concrete, I mixed some Brusho in. And this is one of the few times it's actually worked properly. A lot of the time, I couldn't find an example of one where it's gone really wrong. In fact, this one, you see how there's kind of little blue patches in it? That one, I did the exact same process. I put a little bit less in, but not that much less. And it's just kind of not worked with it as well. So I tend to recommend with concrete, I always think it's something where you create a kind of blank slate that you can decorate on top afterwards with paint, with stamps, with marbling, and I'll show you how to do all of these later, and with kind of foiled effects as well, like that kind of thing. But if you're wanting something where you mix colour into it, you can do very similar techniques with a material called Jesmonite, which is one of my absolute favourites, and it comes out like that. So if you're looking for something sort of a bit more where you're not decorating it afterwards, I would go for Jesmonite instead. But concrete is much cheaper, much more accessible, and just lovely to work with. So without further ado, let's get started. So the mixing cup that I'm going to use, where did I put it? Popped it down here, there we go. So these two are ones that I've used in the past for Jesmonite, so it's got some little bits in it. So if you've seen any Terrazzo things, Terrazzo is this technique where you get little chips of a rock, or in this case Jesmonite, and you put them in as you're mixing stuff, and you get these little lovely chips of colour coming in. So one thing I've started doing quite a lot of recently is using, when I've mixed Jesmonite on something, I'll use the same pot for doing concrete so that you get little bits of colourful colours coming through, which you don't have to do obviously, but I just figured I would show it as an extra technique as I'm doing it. So I always just kind of crack them off like that. So a little bit of ASMR for you there. Just get those bits off. So then I'm going to tip those into there so that I can add them into it later. And as I mix on top of this, we'll get little bits from that in as well. Oh, and I should have said as well, I would recommend putting something on your table that's going to protect it. So I've just got some paper here. I've not been precious about it. It's one that's been on for past workshops, which is why it's got a few little kind of T rings on it. But it's one of those where it does get messy, so you want to protect your surfaces. And I'm wearing an apron as well, just because it can go all over the place. Oh, hi Irene, thank you so much for tuning in. So I'm going to open my concrete now, and if you're only just tuning in, I was saying earlier, I would very much recommend, if you're doing this at home, that you wear a face mask, because concrete is abrasive to your lungs. I've got quite bad asthma, so I can attest that if I do this all day, I definitely notice that it's not the nicest thing. So gloves, face mask, all of that. And so this is a nice plain colour. A lot of the time when you buy concrete, it will be quite a muddy colour. So this is one that's, it's not the worst one, but often it will be quite kind of brown and sludgy. And then when you try and do anything on top of it, it will be a little bit of a mess. So this is just a nice fine one. It also doesn't have big rocks in. And sometimes having lots of rocky bits in it are quite nice, because then you get bits at the bottom like this, where It's a nightmare when you're sanding things like this back, but it means that you get these little bits here, which I'll show you what I tend to do with them later because it's quite satisfying. Also, we've got 21 people watching at the moment. That is lovely. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. And please do let me know where you're watching from and any crafty projects that you're working on at the moment. So the one thing that I've forgotten is I normally grab a spoon, and because normally I have a spoon already in there, I've forgotten it. But that's okay because I can use one of my yogurt pots as a scoop. So as you're doing this, I would always do it really, really gently. I'm just going to tip some of it into here. And this is sort of a bit like making icing sugar. So you want to do it in a really slow and controlled way. And always pop the lid back on afterwards. Oh, hi Rosemary in Scotland. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's very much appreciated. So has anyone watching done anything in concrete before? So I'd always recommend mixing it a little bit at a time rather than doing a big batch, because with a lot of concrete, again, the drying time varies so much depending on which one you use. Like this one sets in about 2 hours. If I'm lucky, sometimes it sets by the end of a live session, but it might not do that today because it's quite a damp day. But if it's a really hot, sunny day, it will set a bit quicker. So it's nice that this one sets quickly, but other ones will take 24 hours. And even if it looks set, I wouldn't pop it out until at least 24 hours because sometimes it can feel solid, and then the second you pop it out of a mold, it will just crumble into bits. Also, we've got Hillary in Bristol, one of my favourite places. My cousin is moving there next week for uni. I'm so excited for him. And Lindsay in Cardiff. That's fantastic. Cardiff's awesome. So you pour in a little bit at a time and just kind of let it soak in a little bit. And then again, with this, you want to stir it incredibly gently because the faster and more aggressively you stir it, firstly, it can end up going all over the place. Secondly, it creates a lot more dust. So you just want to be nice and gentle. And you want it to be kind of a yogurty texture. Because if you do it thinner than that, it's really nice and easy to pour. But the thinner it is, the weaker your pot will be. And you want to make sure that you kind of get all of the sides, scrape them all in. So I'm going to get a few little terrazzo bits there. Oh, and we've got Andrea from Grantham in Lincolnshire. I was passing there really recently. I was working at a festival nearby and I considered visiting on my day off and ran out of time. So with these, if you're going to do anything like this, so these are, if anyone's just tuning in now, little bits of jesmonite, which is a similar material to concrete. And just because I had some here, these are bits from a workshop I did last week. So I'm literally just going to tip them in. You don't have to do this bit at all. I just thought, while I had it, I might as well. So when I take this one out of the mould, it's going to have these nice little colourful bits working through it. So you want to really, really make sure it's really well mixed. And this has gone really well first time, but a lot of the time it is very, very much like icing sugar where you put too much water in or too much concrete. So I'd always recommend pouring a tiny bit of water in at a time. But if you put too much water in, if it's so much that it's kind of floating on the top, I would kind of pour it out into something so that you can use that water again later. But if it's only a little bit too much, you can just kind of add an extra little scoop of concrete and just keep going until it gets to this texture. Because as you lift it up, you want it to kind of not drop down. You want it to like stay on perfectly. Oh, I've got Diane watching from Bulgaria. That's, you win the prize for furthest away at the moment. That's ace. So when you're choosing containers for your recycled bits, something like this with something like this one in the middle would be absolutely perfect because you see you've got kind of a centimetre around the edge. So that makes it really nice and easy to work with. Whereas you wouldn't go for something like this one in here because when it comes to take it away, this bit is just going to break. So you need a really good amount of room around it. So something like that would work well, although things like this are brilliant because you get all of the little indentations and you see the kind of CCE mark there, that would come out in it, like this one over here, where it's got just all of the little indentations on it. This is one that I did for a friend's wedding a few years ago, and it's got like the recycling mark. It's just very satisfying. So once you mix them up, you just scrape it into whatever's going to be your outer container. And just scrape out as much as you possibly can. So I'll be showing you at the start kind of how to do them, and then I'll show you loads and loads of different ways that you can decorate them. So you can see the way it's kind of sat in there, it's not all the way to the bottom, it's just kind of formed in little blobs. So is everyone watching kind of Virtual Village Hall regulars? There's always so much good stuff going on. So once you've scraped it all out, what you're going to do is just tap it down like this. And I think this is the most satisfying bit. It makes me proper happy. And I don't know why, I just really enjoy it. You just kind of go tap, 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 tap. And then if I zoom in, see if I can get it to work. They might not come up yet, but you get like little air bubbles. So you see one there's just formed. It's just really satisfying seeing them rise to the surface. And the more air bubbles you can get rid of, the better, because that just means that your pot will be so much stronger. But I always think it's quite nice to have a few, because then they kind of form around the side, like on this one. I always think they're just quite a nice feature. And I'm just going to scrape this bit off here, because the more that you have at the top like that, the more it means you're going to have to sand it back. And you don't have to sand it back, but if you want it to look neat, it's the best thing to do. So I tend to, when I'm scraping off the side, I'll always do it at one side rather than kind of just putting it all over the place. You can see all of these little bits that have jumped out. So I'm just going to do that. And what you want to do is fill it up kind of 3/4 of the way and then put the middle bit in. So if I'd filled it up all the way to the top, see the bubbles are getting bigger now. If I filled it up all the way to the top when I was doing this, it would be impossible to get most of the bubbles out because it's just such a bigger volume. So they form kind of like this little kind of mound and then they pop. So I always spend a good bit of time doing this. It's always fun when I do this for workshops and there's just a whole room full of people diligently like tapping their pots. The other thing that you can do is tap it at the side like that. And I saw something recently where if you kind of scrape around the sides, this is more for jesmonite than concrete, but apparently that helps it, although it doesn't look like it's going to. Maybe that is something that is much more of a jesmonite thing. There we go. Once it looks nice and level again, then you can put your next one in. The other good thing with doing a smaller bottom layer is that the one thing that can happen with this is when you push your middle bit into it, sometimes it can break through the bottom. So when you've got one layer, it will kind of start to, not completely set, but it will do a little bit of setting. So that means that you're less likely to push it through. So you do want to work quite quickly with it. So I'm just going to get more concrete and do another layer on top. Have we got anyone who's watching who is doing this at the same time? Or is everyone watching to give it a go later? If you're doing this on a massive scale, I would recommend kind of getting a bucket. Sounds so daft, but you literally get 2 different size buckets, so one that's smaller than the other. And then I would always line it with something like just a plastic bag so that it's easier to take out, because if it's something as rigid as the bucket, it's a nightmare to take off. And then just do the exact same process, but on a bigger scale. So I would mix all of your concrete in the bucket and just be really careful to kind of like get all of the edges in so you don't have unmixed concrete around the side. So I've put way too much water in here, so this is a good lesson. So that just doesn't look good at all, so we're going to add some more concrete to it. So if you were doing it on a big scale, you would do it with kind of cheaper concrete, so you could just get the stuff from B&Q that comes in a massive bag and has lots of rocks in it, because when it's on a bigger scale you don't have to worry about that. But if there's lots of rocks on something like this, then it's going to break through the side a lot easier. And if you've got a bag on the inside of your bucket, then when you take it out, it's going to have all of those creases from it, which you can kind of use as a feature, and it just looks like a kind of big paper bag thing, or you can sand it down. But if you're sanding down concrete, I would always do it outside wearing a mask. There we go, that's looking better. And you can also do that with this, like you could always put a plastic bag in one of these, so you get that effect. Or I've done it before where you get bubble wrap like this one here, and you lay bubble wrap around the side of it and then pour it on top. But it's a bit of a nightmare because it does get stuck, so you can see, oh no, I've managed to get it all away in this, but often there'll be little bits of plastic that get trapped around the side. But it's a nice way to get different textures. And I've done it with leaves and stuff like that before, but leaves tend to be really unsuccessful and they'll just get sucked into it and a bit destroyed. So I'm going to pour that on in. So now that it's at that level, I'm going to save this bit and use it in one of the other moulds. Oh, Andrea says she's supposed to be working, so she'll do it another time. Don't worry, we won't tell anyone. It's all good. And Diane's just watching as well that day. So you want to get it all level and get as many bubbles out as possible, because once you put the middle bit in, if there's, you can see all of these nice little mounds for me, it's going to be really hard to get the bubbles out. So there's no real way to speed up this process, which I quite like. It's nice sometimes when you have a process that takes a little bit longer and you have to be patient with it. But nearly there. It's kind of like with popcorn, when you're waiting for like there to be less pops and then you get it out the microwave. You look for less air bubbles and then you pop it in. So I think we're starting to get there now. I'll just get rid of these little ones that have formed. And then put the middle bit in. Oh, and another thing to say is, so all of the bits that I use at the bottom tend to be flat at the bottom. So if you were using something like this one's got little bits of concrete on it, and that's because someone put this in the middle of one before, and I'd say, no, don't do that. Because if you put something like this in, because it's got all of that texture, it's going to get really locked in, and because it flares out at the bottom. So you want something that goes in and is flatter at the bottom, like something like that would work really, really well. But you wouldn't put like a kind of cardboard coffee cup that's got a little bit of a lip at the bottom. So then pop that in, pop your thumbs around it and tap it. And sometimes it will do what mine's doing, where it will get taller on one side. So you want to tap it to the other side so it starts to even out. And you don't want to push it down so far because it breaks through the bottom. And you don't want this to go all the way up to the top. Just a couple of millimeters below is perfect. And tapping it again holds it in the middle and keeps it straight. And then you just leave that to set. And then I would give this kind of a good, like I was saying earlier, sometimes it's a bit quicker. But I would normally give this one at least 5 hours to make sure. And then what you do is squeeze the middle and pull it out and do a little cut in the side and peel the plastic around it off. And that works brilliantly. You might be able to see here, there's like a little lip where it's slowly lifting out of the concrete. So if that happens, just keep an eye on it and every so often just push it back down, because it will, before it starts to set a bit more, kind of try and lift out a bit. So that is how you do it in a recycled container. And then I've got a few different silicone ones here. So these are nice because you can get a shape like these ones are these kind of thing. And you can just kind of reuse these again and again. Although if you are going to try out Jesmonite as well, I would recommend, like this one at the end I always use for concrete. So concrete is a bit more corrosive, so it's started to erode this one, whereas these ones at the end I've not used for concrete. So it's not damaged them as much. And it does take a long time and you still can use them. So with this, whatever you put in first is going to be the top of your container. So you can sometimes do this as well, where if you get different types of concrete, you can layer it up. So you'd let one dry and then do the other on top of it. And you can get concrete dyes, but they tend to come in really, really boring colours. So like you can get black, brick red and grey, which is not the most exciting. But I sometimes find if you get a bit of black concrete dye and put it in your bottom layer, then you get a nice kind of effect to it. Apparently in Germany you can get all sorts of beautiful concrete dyes in all sorts of different colours. I've never found a way to get them over to the UK easily. So exact same with this. You tap it so it goes all the way down to the bottom, and you just want to do it a little layer at a time, and then with your glove you can always scrape off the excess like this, and you can always get bits from here and pop it in. So this one's a really nice easy one because the sides don't slope at all. And I'll show you a more complicated one in one moment. And then I'll show you lots of different decoration techniques. So really simple with this one. All you're doing is tapping it down so it goes to the bottom, just a little bit at a time. And you can get these on eBay pretty easily. When I first started doing this a few years ago, it was really hard to come by them, but they are getting more available now. And you can always use these for kind of resin, Jesmonite, all sorts of stuff like that as well. And you want to fill these all the way to the top, so I'll get a little bit more concrete. And has anyone watching done any resin? Because it's one of those things where in the past I've done a few where I've done half in concrete and half in resin. I don't do as much resin now just because it's just a bit of a faff. Like, it looks so pretty, but there's so much kind of wearing like a respirator and stuff to do it. It's just a bit of a faff, but it's okay. Ooh. Ooh, I hope I've not put too much water in that, because it was probably a bit too much concrete anyway. Yeah, I think we might be all right once I scrape all of it in. It's the thing, whenever I do a live session, I always make more mistakes than I would do offline. So maybe a little bit more, but actually, while it's a bit runnier, so it's not by much. Yeah, actually, it's not dropping, so that's the main thing. It is definitely a little bit runnier than the last one, but not in a way that's going to be a nightmare. So that one you just fill up to the top, nice and easy. And with that, I would just come back to it every so often to tap it rather than doing it all at once. But with these ones, because the sides aren't so solid, the air bubbles do lift up quite a bit quicker. There we go, I'll come back to that in a second. You'll probably see these on screen just like popping every so often. But this one is a similar mould, but it's got, because it's not straight sides and it's all kind of geode-y, you have to be super careful with it. So with something like this, what you do is pour a little bit in. I've only got these ones recently and they're lovely, but they are a bit of a hassle. So you just put a little bit in and tap it down. So you just have to do this one a tiny bit at a time, because if not, you get so many little broken bits around the edge of it. And then let's tap that one at the same time. So this one takes a lot more patience. All right. And I'll be back soon with an Untitled garden decoration workshop, just for the very last bits of the summer before we head into autumn. So you can see if you put too much in, it does just go over the side. I always find the hardest thing with concrete is measuring out the right amount, because I always end up with a little bit too much. If you look at this one here, you can see how it's gone a little bit, the texture's changed already, and that's it starting to set. And concrete has this exothermic reaction where it gets hot as it sets. So it's not started to properly set yet, but after a while it'll get really toasty. So this one, I don't think it's full yet, but it's got to a point where it's harder for it to settle in. So if that happens, you just keep giving it a little tap. Maybe it is full, maybe it's just that, yeah. So if that happens, I would just scrape any excess off and just keep an eye on it in a few minutes, just to make sure that it's not completely sunken. Yeah, that probably is full by now. There we go. So that is how you do that bit, and then you would leave it for a good while. So about 5 hours for this one, about 7 hours, well, no, ignore me, about 24 hours for some of the other ones. So now we're on to the fun bit, lots of decoration. So it creates such a nice surface that you can just paint on, draw on, stamp on, all sorts. So with all things like this, what I tend to use is some masking tape. Oh, that's very thick masking tape, actually. There's some more in the room, but I'm not sure where it is. So this is just frog tape, which is just really good, solid stuff. So you can just mask off some areas, pop it on, and then I tend to go along it with my nail. Just to really, really smooth it in place. And I just use acrylic paint for this, or little pots of kind of tester pots for like decorating your house. They work really well. And I'd always apply it with a sponge brush, so you get a really nice finish to it. And I tend to find things with like a pastel-y, chalky colour tend to work really well. So all of this kind of stuff works brilliantly. And these ones you tend to be able to get in the range, so you can get a really good load of colours. And I really like using gold as well. Like gold and concrete just look really nice together. So this one, this still acrylic one, works really beautifully, because you do sometimes find gold is a little bit thin on it and you have to layer it up for quite a long time. So I've just got a little paint palette over here, so I'm just going to pour a little bit onto this, and you don't need much at all. And it's one of those processes where it's always good to kind of do a layer, let it dry, and then do another one on top. So you just dab it on like this, and you can do like what I'm doing, where you go over another layer that you've done. I tend to go onto the top of it as well. And this is one where, for a lot of festivals, I tend to do it where I bring lots of blanks and people decorate them. And I'm always amazed at the level of creativity. So that's looking, I don't know why it's looking as kind of patchy as it is. Normally this one goes on really, really well. What we'll do is we'll leave it like that, and then I'll do another layer on that one in a little while I show you another technique. So doing stuff like this, where you put a kind of metallic foil on it, is a really nice one to do, and that's one where I'll start it now because it takes a little bit of waiting to get it done. So I tend to use just this Fimo stuff, which is generally meant for polymer clay, but it works really well on this. And it comes in gold, bronze and silver. So, but I tend to prefer the gold. So I often find the silver just looks a bit like tin foil. So I'm not the biggest fan of it. So with this, what you do is you start with, you've got a size for metal, well, size for leaf metal, and then you've got a gloss varnish to go on top afterwards. So you get something like this one. Oh God, is this going to have glued itself together? It's the thing, it's not one that I use all that often. I'm just going to try and open it with my apron. If not, we'll try it with some PVA, which isn't the best thing for it. Oh nope, there we go. Managed to get a hold of it. Yeah, that is one of the problems. I would always wipe around the edge after you use it because it does sometimes glue itself together a little bit. So just get a brush, or you can use a sponge brush, and just paint on it in the area that you want to do it in. I often find it won't go into the broken bit, so it's quite nice, so you get these little holes coming through. So I tend to like doing this where it's not in an exact area, so that when I put it on, it does look like it's kind of coming away. It's just quite a rustic finish to it. So then with this, you leave it for, I think it's 7 minutes. I'm going to double check. Oh, nope, 15 minutes. So I'll show you this one right before the end. And what I'll do is I'll put a timer on my other phone so I know what time I need to do it. And then always wash your brush straight after putting it in this stuff because it does get very globby if not. So I'll just put that timer on. And then I'll show you that one in a moment. One of my favourite things to do is to stamp on things. So I love stamps from the English Stamp Company. You get such cute things with them. And I say that this isn't actually an English stamp one, but it's one of my favourites that always gets used for this. And I would use this Saison ink pad, because these work really, really well for it. So with this one, what you do is, let's move that one out the way. I would stamp it a good few times because it does take a little while to build it up, and I would kind of test it on something first to make sure that it's working. Yes, it needs a good bit more onto it. So you want to really, really load it up because you kind of only get one chance with this. Getting there. It's being a bit slow. I might see if there's another ink pad because it might be that that one's just being a bit bad. Yeah, I've got another one over here. Don't know why it's being a pest. I've got another one that's like, I did use these at festivals recently, so it might be that they've been a bit dried out. Oh, it's getting there. Let's try this one. This is a Versacraft one, which does a similar thing. There we go. That's going to work a lot better. So you just make sure that it's really, really well stamped, but you don't want to push it down really, really hard. You just want to very, very gently tap it on so that it gets covered, but it's not going in between all of the lines. Then you get one of your blanks. I've done it on this one already. And if it's something like this that's got lots of different sides to it, you put it on, put loads of pressure, and very slowly wheel it around like that. So then you get something like that. So it normally comes out a lot clearer in the other ink, but that's worked quite nicely. And then once you've used your stamps, I would always recommend getting all of the ink off possible. So this is a good thing about having a paper table cover, is I can just do this quickly, because if not, it can damage them in the long run. And then I love using ones like this as well. So this is just like a little bear. So you just get these lovely little things on it. And you can always use different coloured ones as well. So I've got some that are just like plain shapes as well, so just circles and things like that. I've got a really nice neon ink pad over here. Oh, all of my ink pads are being a pest today. Let's go for another one. Yeah, that's working better. So these don't tend to show up as bright, but you can still get quite a nice effect with them. So you can always do things like this. So you just get a very subtle hint of colour coming through, and when it dries it will be a little bit brighter. And you can always kind of like paint the whole thing white if you wanted to have a nice base to do things like that on top of. And you can always use like letter stamps as well to cover it and things like that. So that works really nicely. And I know that I had loads of techniques, so I'm just remembering which one's best to do next. Oh yeah, and as well as sectioning off things, you can always do stuff like this where you get like nice coloured gradients going around. And I've had a few where people have done, when there's little faceted bits like that, they've done every single one a different colour. And you can do stuff like, where's one of those ones, like this kind of thing, where I've had a lot of times people will just cover the kind of sections like this, so it almost looks a little bit like kintsugi. If you don't know what kintsugi is, it's the Japanese art of fixing broken crockery and things like that with gold. So another thing that I love doing is getting just a small paintbrush, and I tend to do this with gold or something a little bit sparkly, and where you've got broken bits like this, just filling them in and inlaying it with bits of gold so they just kind of sparkle through. If you get a bit of glue and pop it in, you can do this with glitter as well, so it just looks like a gemstone peeking through. So again, with this I would tend to do it and then kind of let it dry and do another layer on top so it gets really nice and bold. And the best thing is, if you go over the top like that, you can always just sand it back, so you don't have to be too precious about it. I'm just going to find another gold. There we go, because that one wasn't coming out as bright as I expected it would. But we've got this other one here. I'm wondering if maybe I've got my golds confused. There we go. That's a good one. So if I pop some of it on with that, then use the sponge. Yeah, that's much thicker. And it just builds it up in a really, really nice way. So another really popular one is doing some marbling. So with this, you can get loads of different marbling inks, and they all work for slightly different things. Like the ones I'm going to use today, I wouldn't use at all for like paper marbling, because they dry way too quick, so they won't do a big area really well. So these are, where have I put them? Over here. Oh, Andrea says, is that gold acrylic paint? Yes. So that one is a Do Crafts Artiste one, and those you tend to get in the range, or I get them from a lovely art shop near me called Colder Graphics, and they do them in all different colours. And that one is, what was it, a metallic titanium gold. That's a good one. So these are Easy Marble by Marabou, and like I was saying, I wouldn't use them for anything that isn't small. And they come in all sorts of different colours. So I tend to find blues and darker colours work really, really well on this, and golds as well. So I would choose like 3 or 4 colours. Let's go for a black, a blue, and maybe a dark purple. And this I would do in a container that's quite deep. So I've got a big jug of water here, and it's one that I've used for marbling lots because you can kind of see the bits around the edge because it's impossible to get this stuff off. So I would always use one that you're not bothered about. And I would give these all a shake, and then you take all of the lids off because they are really, really quick to dry. So you want to be able to do it all as fast as possible. And they smell a little bit like nail varnish, and I think you probably could do this with nail varnish as well. So then you've got them all together. So have these in one hand and the thing you're going to marble in the other, and just drop it like that. And then you can get a toothpick, but I'm just going to go for it. So dip it in, completely submerge it. And it always looks a bit gross when it comes out, but once it dries, it's going to look lovely. So what I'll do is I'll pop that on the paper, and there'll always be little remnants of it in there, and they'll just cling to the side. And those are basically already dried off on there. But the concrete does soak the water in. It's lovely to work with. So then I would always pop the lids back on as quickly as possible, just because they do tend to dry out. And each of these you have to buy individually generally, so they are like quite expensive to buy, so you don't want to waste them. Oh, Andrea says she's loving the marbling, and I very much appreciate that. It is so much fun, isn't it? I got those the wrong way around. Is that the... Oh no, this is... No, that is the purple. We're all good. So I'm just going to pop them back in the box and pop my gloves off, because they do cover your gloves as well. So if you get that on your hands, it's just a bit grim because it's quite sticky for the rest of the day. So how long have we got left on the metal bits? Couple more minutes. So what I would generally recommend with doing with these is giving them a spray with like an acrylic sealer afterwards. I'm not going to do that in here because this is again something that you should definitely do outside. It's awful for your lungs if you do it inside, but you would literally hold it about that distance and just go just a couple of sprays on each side, and that just seals it. And you can do that in between layers as well. So if you wanted to, you could do some layers in paint, do some sealant on it, and then stamp on it, and you just get a smoother like surface to work on. But I tend to just do it afterwards, and it just protects it and just makes it look lovely. So this one here is starting to dry. You can probably see all of those lovely marbling effects that are coming through, and those bits of gold that just kind of pop, but it will still look quite dark for a while because this will go much lighter once it dries out. Yes. Oh, that was the other technique. I was thinking I knew that there was another one. So I don't know if anyone's worked with Posca pens, but they are my favourites. They're incredible. So they're acrylic pens that just draw on everything. And I've tried so many different acrylic pens, and these, I really, really rate them. They just draw on anything. They run really, really well. A lot of the time, acrylic pens will kind of, they'll get a bit clogged and not work particularly well, but these are just gorgeous. So I tend to do stuff like, oh, I didn't bring an example of this one actually. But this I've done with a paintbrush and paint. But normally I would do this kind of mark making with Posca pens. And normally they stand out really, really well, but I seem to have chosen one of the colours that is on a similar backdrop. I'll get another one. I want something that's going to really stand out on that. Let's go for a purple. Oh, Andrea, I've only just seen that. She just said, would Posca pens work on it before I got them out? But yeah, it's great. I would make sure if you've done any painting on it, you kind of let it dry out completely. But Posca pens work brilliantly. They do tend to work a little bit better on the paint rather than on just plain concrete. Although it does, if you're using the Viva Decor, because it's so smooth, it does work quite nicely and just glides on, dries really, really well. But you do have to give it kind of a moment to dry out. It's just great stuff. And you can get them in all different thicknesses as well, so you can really vary some techniques with them. Oh, I've got a pink there that doesn't. So when you first use them, you push the nib down and that gets more colour out. So if they ever start running out, I tend to be able to do that. But that one might be on its last legs. Let's grab another one. Don't know why I'm picking up all of the ones that aren't working, because normally Posca pens work absolutely beautifully. I must have picked up a bad box of them or something, because I've got loads of them. Oh gosh, what is going on? It's the thing, they last for absolutely ever, and then I find at the same time they all go, because it's very rare I have to replace them. So this is very, very unusual. Although I have done a lot of things with them recently. And actually, these are the ones that I did take to a festival. So every so often, they'll get used on stuff that isn't quite dry yet. So when that happens, the nibs do tend to get a little bit wrecked. There we go, that's a good one. So yeah, always wait till the layer underneath is dry and your concrete is completely dry and ready to just doodle on. But they are very, very satisfying to work with. And once they're dry, you can always like go over the top of them as well, so you can really layer them up. I always just tend to do weird little mark making things, but you can do anything you like really, and it's a lot of fun. So we've just got, oh, in fact, we've got 7 seconds left on the marbling size, so I'll turn that off before it starts making loud noises at us, and I'll show you how to do that. So where did I put it? It was this one, wasn't it? So it will be ever so slightly tacky, but sometimes it can be quite hard to see where you've actually done it. So you can see what a mess my table is now. So this is why you always cover your table when you do this. So you get one of these off, and it can be a little bit fiddly to work with. You lift a piece off, pop it on, smooth it down. And it will stick to the areas that it's glued onto and come away from the other bits eventually. So now I've got a little bit more on the bottom there. So it does tend to go into little pieces after a while. So I've got a bit more up there. And once this is dry, you can like stamp on it and all of that kind of stuff as well. So I'm just going to put that away, because it's one of those things where if you leave it out on the table, it ends up getting everywhere. So then you get the varnish for it. Now that's the size. Get the varnish. Pop that in. Ooh. Just trying to see where I've got an extra sponge brush. There we go. And just very, very gently run over it. And it will lift away any bits that aren't on the size. So you can always do it where you get a bit of masking tape and mask off where the size is. And I would do quite a few layers of this. And it will kind of, where there's shapes like this, it will start to fit to it, and it just works really, really nicely. And you can always use this varnish on like other things as well. So it can go kind of on top of your paint and stuff like that. And once that dries, it will look absolutely lovely. And you could cover the whole thing in it, but I always think it looks quite nice when it's kind of rustic like this. And again, with this varnish, I would always wash your brush off really, really quickly. And I'm kind of over brushing it a bit, so it's taking some bits away. But what you can do is with those bits, if you varnish more areas of it, doesn't always, but sometimes those extra little bits will kind of stick to it in the varnish. So that's always quite a nice thing to do. So finishing off bits, I would always recommend for sanding, like if you wanted this to be really, really smooth at the top, always do it outside. And I would get wet and dry sandpaper rather than normal sandpaper. I'm not going to do it in here just because it's always like not good for your lungs to do it indoors. But I would go kind of from a really rough grade of sandpaper and just do like always damp it down and do little circular motions, and it will come away really, really easily. So it's always good to be really, really gentle with it, and then keep going through the grades until you get to the smoothest, so you get a really nice finish. And you can always round it off so it looks really lovely and curved. Like that's what I've done on this one. I've not really sanded it enough because it's still got a dip in the middle, but it does mean this side here is really, really nice and smooth and just works beautifully. Also this one, done a bit of a bad job of this, but that's okay. So what we'll do is just one extra little bit of that paint on top of it. Oh no, that was the one I dunked in the water. That's all right. So normally you'd wait until this is dry, but just for demo's sake, and you'd wait until it was a lot thicker. So best thing to do is leave it for a good while and do extra layers on top, and then just peel it away, and you get those really gorgeous solid lines coming through, and they just look absolutely gorgeous. And then you could always stamp on top of that. You can marble on top of bits that you coloured in, all sorts of bits and bobs. I'm just trying to think. I think that was all of the techniques. I'm just looking at all of my bits and bobs. Is there any questions that anyone's got? So this one here, it's starting to dry off a little bit. You can sort of see a bit more of the marbling coming through. And it is such a nice technique. And if it's rough at the bottom, like this one, because it's got rocks in, would be a nightmare to sand. But you could always give it a go and sand it back so it's nice and flat. And what I would recommend for potting them up, generally, these are really, really good for succulents because they wick water away, but sometimes because it is a little bit caustic, it can harm them. So you want really hardy succulents. So what I would generally recommend doing is putting some pebbles in the bottom, then putting a layer of kind of like succulent or cacti soil, and then put your bits in. So I would recommend using, in fact, where have I put it? I'm just trying to see if my tray of succulents is next to me. Normally I've got loads of them, maybe not. So Andrea said, are they watertight for plants, or do you have to seal it with something inside? I don't tend to seal it, but I'd always make sure I don't overwater them because the concrete will soak the water in, so eventually it will weaken over the time. But you can always varnish it. If you spray the inside with this, it does help resist it a little bit, but I would generally put plants in it that don't need loads and loads of water, so just things that you can gently water them rather than overwatering. So alpine, succulents, cacti will work really, really well in it. And I tend to, in fact, just give me 1 second, I'll just grab my box of things. So I have a lot of succulents in my house, so I often will break bits off. So this is my kind of succulent nursery, because with a lot of them, you break one of these bits off and they'll quickly form roots like this one. So what I tend to do, stick pebbles in the bottom, just a tiny layer of them, bit of soil, and then pop one of these on. And sometimes I'll pop some extra like little pebbles or something on top just to help them root in. And I tend to find I'll go around all of my plants and get these. So, oh, lots of them are forming roots now. Lovely. The other thing is, if you go somewhere like, it's a secret, you shouldn't tell people, but if you go to IKEA, where they've got the plant section, they always have broken bits of plants just around them all over the place. So I'll often go in and get loads of little plant bits, and they don't mind because it's saving them the job of cleaning them all up. But it means that eventually they will turn into lovely big succulents. Like you can see this one here is slowly growing a tiny new succulent on top of it. And what will happen is that main big leaf will die back over time, and this one will turn into a lovely little succulent. Like, my sister's getting married next year, so she's doing all of these as her wedding favours, and is growing loads of little baby succulents that will grow into something lovely and tall and beautiful. So lots of these I need to repot at some point, because I've just kind of left this for a while. So I think that is about everything, and we're nearly bang on an hour. So thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. If you've got any questions, please do feel free to drop me a message at Darn It Workshops. I'm on all the things on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of that, and based in Huddersfield, but do workshops all over the place, and I would love to see photos of what you make as well. Enjoy your day. Bye, everyone.